A girl with skin white as snow, lips red as blood, and hair black as ebony sounds like pure invention until you learn the tale may hide traces of medieval rituals, alchemical recipes, and real politics from early modern Europe. This documentary follows Snow White from the forests of the German lands to the printed pages of the Brothers Grimm in 1812 and into the modern imagination. We will ask how a children's story absorbed older mythic patterns, why miners and mirrors appear so precisely, and what an apple has to do with forbidden knowledge and social control. Begin not with a castle, but with a cold room where people told stories to pass the dark. In the late medieval German lands, winters were long, families were large, and lives were uncertain. Mothers died in childbirth, fathers remarried, and households blended in uneasy ways. Around hearths, people told cautionary tales about jealousy, hunger, and the dangers beyond the village. Out of that setting grew a cluster of story patterns we now recognize inside Snow White: the rival older woman, the tests of obedience, the sanctuary found in a small home at the edge of the forest. These patterns were not invented by a single author. They were the memory of a society that was learning to live with scarcity, second marriages, and the delicate status of daughters who could be both beloved children and bargaining chips in marriage alliances. Move forward into the early modern era, when Europe's economy and technologies began to change. One change mattered more than it first appears. Mirrors became clearer, larger, and cheaper. Artisans in places like Venice and, later, German towns perfected mercury and tin-coated glass. Suddenly, the wealthy and then the middling classes could see themselves with a level of detail that felt uncanny. A mirror does not only reflect a face, it reflects social rank. Grooming and fashion turned into public signals, and a woman's appearance became an object of commentary and comparison within cramped courts and townhouses. The idea of a speaking mirror is, at heart, social surveillance, a device that repeats back to you the verdict of a judgmental world. This culture shift helps explain why a tale about a mirror could take hold. The mirror is both a gadget of the new age and a moral instrument, a way to dramatize the pressure to be seen as the fairest. Another change swept in from underground. The German lands were dotted with mining districts: Harz, Thuringia, the Erzgebirge, the Spessart, and the people who worked these mines had their own folklore. Miners imagined and spoke about Bergmenschen, Kobolde, and Wichtelmenschen, small, skillful beings who lived inside the earth, kept secrets of ore and stone, and sometimes helped or hindered human diggers. Mining also relied on children and very short-statured workers who could move through cramped shafts where adults could not. In such a landscape, the image of little men who labored all day and returned to a tidy cottage at night was not a comic idea. It was the familiar shape of a community whose labor rhythms governed entire valleys. Glassmaking, too, often neighbored mining because the raw materials and the forest fuel were close at hand. A glass coffin is not only a poetic invention, it is a product of workshops that turned sand and heat into transparent marvels. While these everyday facts shaped the soil, literary gardeners in the 17th century began to transplant and cultivate folk plots. In Naples, a storyteller named Giambattista Basile collected tales that would later influence Europe's canon. One of his tales, The Young Slave, features a striking echo of Snow White. A girl brought low by jealousy, a dangerous comb, and a glass chest. Basile's version is not the same as Snow White, but it shows that the core motif, a young woman's beauty provoking violence, her apparent death, and her eventual revival, was already circulating in written form far from the German forests. French salon writers also played with similar themes, but Snow White, as we know it, did not crystallize there. The tale's most familiar shape would appear later, in the hands of two brothers who thought of themselves as scholars, not entertainers. Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm came of age in a moment of national searching. The Napoleonic invasions had humiliated many small German states, and educated patriots wanted to find what was authentically theirs. The brothers studied law, then turned to philology, medieval poetry, and, crucially, to the living speech of their neighbors. Beginning in the second decade of the 19th century, they collected stories that they called children's and household tales. The title did not mean the stories were only for children. It meant the material came from domestic talk rather than elite literature. The Grimms relied on networks of informants, women from middle-class families, servants and acquaintances, many from the castle region. The tale we call Snow White emerged from that web. In their first printed collection, the story already has the famous core: a jealous queen, a flight into the forest, 7 little men, 3 attempts on the girl's life, the red and white apple, the deceptive sleep, and a return to life. Yet the printed page did not end the tale's evolution. Across later editions, the brothers revised and moralized. In an early version, the jealous figure was the girl's biological mother. That detail reflects real household tensions where birth mothers, not only stepmothers, could be severe rivals with their daughters for food, attention, and marriage prospects. But as the brothers moved toward a more didactic tone, they replaced the mother with a stepmother to soften the scandal and align the tale with a more palatable moral universe. They sharpened the motif of envy, emphasized the virtue of domestic work in the dwarf's home, and underlined the punishments that await cruelty. As editors, they were not neutral recorders. Cause led to effect. Their desire to present a national treasure shaped the form of that treasure, and the choices they made fixed the version that most readers would come to know. Outside the study, rumors started to link Snow White to real lives. The first strong candidate was a 16th-century noblewoman named Margaretha von Waldeck. She grew up in a mining region with a father who controlled copper operations near Wildungen. Those mines used children and very short workers to navigate tight seams. Margaretha's mother died, her father remarried, and she later traveled to the Low Countries, where she moved in high political circles and died young under suspicious circumstances. Some accounts suggest poisoning. The parallels are suggestive: a young noblewoman, a stepmother, a mining landscape populated by little people, and a death by poison. Whether or not Margaretha inspired the tale, her life shows how the ingredients of the story sat within real social conditions: blended families, extractive economies, and court intrigue where a girl's beauty could be both asset and threat. A second historical figure comes from the 18th century: Maria Sophia von Erthal, associated with the town of Lohr am Main. Her family's home lay near the Spessart forest, and the area was known for glassmaking and mirrors. Local lore points to a looking glass produced in a nearby manufactory, with inscriptions that could have felt like a mirror that speaks. The region also had mining settlements, and the forested landscape fits the tale's geography with eerie accuracy. As with Margaretha, the evidence is circumstantial rather than conclusive, but the circumstantial details matter. They show that the story's props, the mirror, the glass coffin, the forest cottage, the dwarf's mine, were not random. They were drawn from the material culture of specific German districts where glass, ore, and timber met. When people in those districts told and retold the tale, they could point to objects, trades, and pathways that brought the fiction to life. To understand why Snow White took this particular shape, look at cause and effect within households. Step relationships were common because death was common. A father's remarriage often created competition between a new wife and an older daughter near marriageable age. Inheritance rules could place the daughter in direct conflict with a woman who wanted to secure property for her own future children. When the tale opens with a queen pricking her finger and wishing for a child of white, red, and black, it stages color as destiny. White suggests innocence, red suggests life and desire, and black suggests the border with death. These are not only poetic cues, they are also a social script. The girl must move from innocence through danger toward adult status. Each murder attempt maps onto anxieties from daily life. Tight laces were fashion, but they could restrict breath and cause fainting. Decorative combs and hair cosmetics could contain harmful substances in an era before safety regulations. Fruit was a treat, but also a risk during shortages, and apple trees carried their own lore of temptation. By weaving such hazards into the plot, the tale dramatizes a girl's passage through a world where beauty makes her visible and vulnerability makes her a target. The forest, too, is more than scenery. In early modern German imagination, the forest was both pantry and peril. Families relied on it for fuel, grazing, and foraging, but it was also a hiding place for soldiers, debtors, and bandits. When Snow White flees into the woods, the story expresses a social truth. Escape from household tyranny leads into another danger that only labor and community can soften. The 7 little men offer shelter with conditions. She must cook, clean, and keep order. Domestic work is framed as a covenant. In return, she gains safety and a kind of apprenticeship in running a household, a rite of passage toward adulthood. The number 7 echoes through religious and folk traditions, but in a mining context, it also evokes the ordered shifts and shared rules that allow a crew to survive underground. The cottage becomes a training ground where private diligence wards off public threat. Consider the glass coffin, one of the tale's most haunting images. In an era fascinated by transparency, glass turned into a symbol of purity and preservation. Churches displayed relics under glass, and craftsmen advertised their mastery with clear panes and ornaments. To place Snow White in a glass coffin is to keep her beauty visible yet untouchable, as if the community agrees to freeze her at the threshold between girlhood and womanhood. The effect is not only aesthetic, it is political. Her apparent death suspends the choice she threatens to others. The jealous queen can no longer be dethroned as the fairest, and potential suitors are held at bay. In that suspension, the tale hints at a deeper argument. A society that turns girls into symbols also risks turning them into objects, even in death. When the Grimms printed the tale, they did so during a surge of romantic nationalism. They believed that collecting folk stories would strengthen a shared identity across the patchwork of German states. Their editorial choices reflect that goal. They kept elements that felt timeless, trimmed what seemed coarse, and amplified moral clarity. The result was a version of Snow White that could serve as both entertainment and cultural emblem. It was familiar enough to ordinary readers, filled with tools, trades, and landscapes they recognized, and elevated enough to satisfy a scholarly project that looked backward for roots. That balance explains the tale's durability. It speaks in everyday images that carry old wisdom without demanding a degree to decode them. The conflict begins with a single question that refuses to stay inside a mirror. Who is fairest, and who gets pushed aside when the answer changes? In the earliest printed version of the tale, the jealous woman hears that the girl has surpassed her and decides to erase the threat. That decision sets the pattern for everything that follows. Her motive is not hunger for power in a kingdom. It is fear of being replaced. The story tightens around that fear until it becomes violence disguised as care, gifts, or fashion. Each step escalates the danger and makes the young girl's choices matter more. The first critical choice is the order to kill. The jealous woman commands a huntsman to take the girl into the forest, end her life, and bring back proof. The huntsman stands at a crossroads between obedience and conscience. He chooses to spare the girl and deceive the queen with the organs of a wild animal. That decision shifts the conflict from direct murder to covert pursuit. It also introduces a key pattern that repeats throughout the tale. The violence of adults will now arrive not as a blow, but as a trick. The huntsman's mercy creates space for the girl to flee, but it also forces the villain to change tactics. A killing that would have ended the story becomes a pursuit that will sustain it. The girl finds shelter in a cottage and agrees to a pact with its owners. The rules seem simple: work hard, follow the house's advice, and do not open the door to strangers. The pact gives her safety, but it is conditional. Breaking the rules will have consequences. The jealous woman, learning that the girl still lives, turns to disguise. The conflict becomes a contest between vigilance and deception. The disguised visitor will knock 3 times. After each visit, the house's warnings will be clearer, and the trick will be harder to resist. The first attempt is a lace. Fashion in that era prized tight stays and neat bodices, and laces were a marker of order. The disguised woman offers a new lace and insists on tying it herself. The lace becomes a weapon. Pulled too tight, it stops breath and makes the girl collapse. The attempt almost succeeds because it feels like help. Straightening clothes seems like care, and the line between grooming and harm is easy to miss. When the girl's household companions return, they cut the lace and restore her breath. The effect of this scene is twofold. It shows that community can reverse harm, and it raises the stakes by proving that the villain can find the house and breach its rules. The warning is explicit. Do not let anyone in again. The second attempt is a comb. Hair is pride and identity. Combing is a daily ritual. The disguised woman praises the girl's beauty and offers a fine comb that hides poison on its teeth. The trap works because it exploits vanity in a gentle form. Wanting to look presentable is not a sin, but in this story it is a vulnerability. The comb enters the girl's hair, and she falls as if dead. The household companions examine her carefully, find the comb, and pull it out. Breath returns. The pattern tightens. A useful object becomes the delivery system for harm, and rescue depends on noticing a small detail. The companions repeat their warning with more urgency. The girl promises to be careful, and still the door will open one more time. The third attempt is an apple. This gift is different. It is carried like fruit from a neighbor, it looks harmless, and it is split to show fairness. The disguised woman eats the untainted half, and the girl takes the other. The bite sticks in her throat, and she collapses with no mark on her body and no tool left to remove. The escalation is complete. The first trick used a visible bond that could be cut. The second used a hidden instrument that could be found and pulled away. The third uses a swallowed fragment that cannot be seen. The household companions cannot revive her. They refuse burial because her body has not decayed and looks too vivid to hide, so they place her in a transparent coffin and stand watch. The conflict exits the realm of normal time and enters suspension. The villain has achieved her goal in a way that cannot be confirmed or undone by ordinary means. Behind these 3 visits sits a sequence of editorial decisions that shaped how readers would feel the escalation. In the first printed collection by the 2 scholar editors, the jealous woman was the girl's mother, not a stepmother. This detail sharpened the cruelty at the heart of the conflict. A mother's envy worked like a wound inside the household. A few years later, in a revised edition, the editors changed the mother into a stepmother. That choice did not alter the plot mechanics, but it changed the emotional charge and broadened the story's acceptability. Audiences could now tolerate the villain's extremes because the bond being broken was less sacred. At the same time, the editors amplified the rhythm of the 3 attempts, clarifying the warnings and anchoring the lesson that a young person's safety depends on learning to recognize false gifts. Another editorial choice shaped the moment of seeming victory. In one early version, the queen demands the victim's lungs and liver, salts them, and eats them. This grisly detail is not decoration. It tells the reader that the villain wants more than the girl's removal. She wants to incorporate the girl, to own the beauty that replaced her. The act is both revenge and consumption. Later editions often kept the demand and softened the description. The fact remained. The conflict is about control of the girl's body and the social value attached to it. While the girl lies in her glass coffin, time passes in story terms, and here the versions diverge. In some tellings, animals keep watch. In others, the household companions place the coffin on a mountain path where travelers can see. The person who will end the suspension arrives by chance, not conquest. He sees the body and asks to take the coffin, first as a relic of beauty, then out of an insistence that borders on obsession. In an early text, servants stumble while carrying the coffin, and the jolt dislodges the piece of apple. Breath returns. The rescue is mechanical, not magical. It depends on a bump, on gravity, on a simple accident. In other versions, a kiss awakens her. That change, widely spread later, rewrites the cause of revival from chance and careful observation to romance. The shift matters because it changes who holds the power to resolve the conflict. In the accident version, no one understands what the problem was or how they fixed it. In the kiss version, a named person's intention and affection become the cure. Illustrators and adapters reinforced these choices over the 19th and 20th centuries. Pictures fixed the girl's age as young, the household companions as benign, and the queen as elegant and lethal. Each decision narrowed the range of possible readings and raised the tension between surface innocence and underlying danger. Names for the household companions, which were not part of the early printed tale, appear in later entertainment versions to distinguish personalities and lighten the tone. That softening of the companions sharpens the queen by contrast. She becomes the singular source of threat, and the story's energy is pulled more tightly around the duel between her and the girl. The final phase of the conflict is the reckoning. After the girl returns to life, plans are made for a wedding. The jealous woman consults her mirror again, learns that the girl has re-entered the world, and decides to attend the celebration to inspect the rival. There, the punishment arrives. In the scholarly editor's mature edition, the queen is forced to wear red-hot shoes and dance until she dies. This sentence feels theatrical, but it has a narrative logic. The woman who turned adornment into harm is punished through a perversion of adornment. Shoes are part of costume and presentation. Here, they burn. The dance, a courtly display, becomes exhausting torture. The editors chose to keep this ending, perhaps because it tied the conflict back to the earlier tricks and reminded readers that violence had traveled through fashion and ceremony all along. Outside the text, the conflict's development continued as the tale moved into mass media. A landmark animated adaptation in the late 1930s brought new beats. The revival became a kiss of true love. The household companions gained comedic business and individual traits. The queen's magic was shown in vivid scenes that linked beauty care with witchcraft. Those choices did more than entertain. They standardized an emotional map for global audiences. Envy becomes witchcraft, innocence becomes song, labor becomes cheerful routine, and the solution becomes romantic recognition. The mass version did not erase the earlier mechanics. It rearranged them into a form that emphasized personal feelings over accidents and community rescue. That rearrangement has lasted. For many viewers, the image of a kiss at a glass coffin is now the expected resolution, even though in earlier printings, the resolution required no kiss at all. Scholars who compare tale types place this story within a catalog that tracks motifs across cultures. They point out that the trio of attempts, the object that causes a death-like sleep, and the transparent container appear in many places with local details changed. Some variants replace the apple with a ring or a pin. Some move the setting from a forest to a mountain or a farm. What holds steady is the rhythm of escalation and the cost of failing to recognize malice in polite form. The conflict is not a clash of armies. It is a lesson in reading intentions behind gifts, in knowing when to close a door, and in understanding that social tools, clothes, combs, food, can be turned into weapons when envy takes over. The way the conflict escalates also maps a change in the girl's agency. At first, she is naive and governed by fear. She accepts the lace because she welcomes help. After the rescue, she hears the warning and promises caution, but she still opens the door for the flattering visitor who praises her hair. After the second rescue, the warnings become stern, and yet she still bites the apple when it is split to appear fair. Her missteps are not stupidity. They are the normal steps of someone learning to navigate a world where danger arrives smiling. The final suspension in the coffin marks a surrender of control. but the return to life opens a chance for a new status. In the harsher early endings, the marriage that follows is not a reward for passivity. It is a formal re-entry into society with proof that she has survived envy and learned caution. The punishment of the villain is staged in public to close the conflict and restore order. Another set of decisions concerns the relationship between the girl and her hosts. In some versions, they are strict and condition their shelter on work and obedience. In others, they are playful and warm. That choice does not change the core conflict, but it changes how the audience interprets the girl's mistakes. Strict guardians make her disobedience look more serious, and the third fall more tragic. Playful hosts make the falls look like the misadventures of a trusting heart. In either case, the pattern remains. Warnings grow stronger, tricks grow subtler, and the consequence grows harder to reverse. The conflict's trajectory from murder plot to courtroom-style punishment has one more hinge: the moment the prince demands the coffin. Why would a living person want to own a transparent box with a seemingly dead stranger inside? Early texts do not justify this desire beyond the language of beauty and wonder. Later retellings supply love at first sight to soften the act. This is not a small tweak. It moves the story's climax from eerie possession to romantic destiny. In doing so, it screens out discomfort about a culture that treats a woman as a display object, and instead offers comfort in the idea of a bond that exists before speech. Whether that improvement truly improves is a question audiences continue to debate. The last change worth noting is how the tale's moral emphasis shifts depending on the chosen resolution. If a stumble frees the apple, the lesson tilts toward material causes and the importance of patient caretaking. If a kiss breaks the spell, the lesson tilts toward recognition, loyalty, and a bond that transcends danger. If punishment focuses on the grotesque dance, the lesson warns about the costs of envy expressed through vanity. If the ending is softened for younger readers, the lesson becomes more about forgiveness and less about justice. Each choice tunes the conflict for a new time without changing its skeleton. That is the sign of a robust narrative. It can hold different weights without breaking. What do the story's objects and choices mean when we look past the surface? Start with the mirror. A mirror seems private, but in this tale it behaves like society itself. It delivers a verdict about worth and rank. Scholars often read the speaking mirror as a symbol of social surveillance. In courts and towns where status was fragile, a woman's appearance could decide alliances, gossip, and favor. The mirror becomes a stage on the wall, repeating the chorus of opinion that surrounds the jealous woman. This reading helps explain why the question of fairness turns violent. If beauty is a public currency, losing it feels like losing place. The mirror is not magic alone. It is the pressure to perform in front of an invisible audience that never stops judging. The apple carries a different weight. Across European tradition, apples sit at the edge between blessing and taboo. They appear in harvest customs, in love charms, and in stories where a bite brings wisdom or trouble. In this tale, the apple is attractive, portable, and easy to share. It is also divided. The split apple shows how harm can hide inside fairness. One half is safe, one half is lethal. Both look identical. The message is simple and sharp. Appearances can be arranged to look equal while power remains unequal. The girl accepts the offer because it looks just. That is the trap. The apple teaches a lesson about consent. Saying yes under a false frame is not a free choice at all. The story warns that language of fairness can mask control. Color deepens the symbols. The girl is described with a triad: white, red, black. Many readers see here the language of life stages. White suggests childhood and snow, a clean beginning. Red suggests the onset of desire and danger, the risk and promise of adult life. Black suggests the border with death and the unknown. Some historians also note that alchemical texts from early modern Europe use a similar triad to mark stages of transformation, often called blackening, whitening, and reddening. We cannot prove that the tale was written to model alchemical steps, but it is fair to say that the colors would have resonated in a culture where those terms circulated alongside religious art and craft manuals. The triad makes the girl's journey legible as a passage through trials toward a new state. Consider the 3 household attacks: lace, comb, apple. Each is an everyday object turned strange. Each also touches a different region of the self. The lace tightens the torso, the center of breath. The comb touches the head, the seat of thought and identity. The apple enters the mouth, the gate between world and body. Read together, the sequence moves from external control to interference with self-presentation, to invasion of the inner life. That is a blueprint for how coercion often works. It begins by controlling motion and dress, then by shaping how a person appears, and finally by taking in what can harm from the inside. The tale traces that arc without sermonizing. Viewers feel it as rising danger because each step reaches deeper. The glass coffin is another symbol with layered meanings. Glass preserves and exposes. In churches, reliquaries made saints visible. In shops, windows displayed goods. In homes, panes opened a view beyond the wall. To place the girl in a clear coffin is to place her body inside an exhibit case. She is preserved, honored, and suspended. She is also objectified. The community agrees to guard and watch beauty without touching it. The effect is both respectful and chilling, and modern readers often notice that tension. We can see how the image comments on a culture that celebrates youth and purity while freezing people at the point where they cannot speak. The number 7 around the household companions invites many readings. 7 is common in European lore. 7 days, 7 virtues, 7 medals in older lists, 7 wounds and joys in devotional life. Some readers relate 7 to work rhythms or to the idea of a complete set. What matters for the story's meaning is how the group functions. They provide rules, labor, and rescue. They do not offer romance or status. They represent a community where survival depends on shared schedules and mutual aid. When they set conditions for the girl's stay, they teach that safety is collective and earned. In that way, the tale gives dignity to ordinary work. The home is not a backdrop. It is a training ground in which discipline is a form of care. The stepmother figure opens another symbolic path. Early versions used the birth mother. Later versions use the stepmother. Either way, the story frames a generational rivalry among women inside a patriarchal order. Modern critics have argued that the villain is not simply evil, but also shaped by a system that values women for appearance and fertility in narrow ways. Her obsession with the mirror looks like adaptation to a world that measures women against one another. That does not excuse the harm, but it shifts the focus from a single bad actor to a culture that turns women into competitors. The tale's power comes from showing how that rivalry can spoil both innocence and authority. Psychological readings have also influenced how people understand the tale. In the 20th century, depth psychologists drew attention to inner conflicts mirrored by fairy tales. They saw the girl's exile as a necessary separation from a controlling parent, the cottage as a space for integrating parts of the self, and the final awakening as entrance into mature life. Whether or not one accepts all of those claims, the pattern has helped educators and therapists use the story to talk about boundaries, trust, and growth with young people. The emphasis in those settings is not on romance, but on learning to read danger and to accept help when needed. The tale's impact on culture is easiest to see in how later makers reused its images. Fashion designers have quoted the color triad and the apple again and again to signal innocence, temptation, and risk. Photographers stage shoots with red lips, white skin, and black backdrops to evoke the mythic frame without naming it. Advertisers borrow the mirror to hint at the pressure of comparison and the promise of a product that will win the silent contest. These uses are not trivial. They keep the symbols alive, which is why the story remains recognizable across languages and decades. When a campaign shows a bitten apple next to a pale face, viewers know the reference at once, even if the brand never says the title. In classrooms, the tale has become a case study for discussing consent and misleading appearances. Teachers point out that the three gifts are presented as help, yet they harm. Students learn to ask what is in the gift and who benefits. The lesson travels beyond personal safety. It applies to media literacy. A polished product can conceal risks, and a split deal that seems fair may not be. In that sense, the story is not only about a single girl, it is about learning to live in a world of offers and images. Cross-cultural comparisons show both range and stability. In Greek myth, the descent of Persephone after eating forbidden seeds touches a similar chord: food that binds, a seasonal suspension, and the return that restores order. In Norse tradition, we find tales where a woman is hidden in a mountain or behind a shining barrier until a condition is met. In Slavic stories, figures like Koschei and Baba Yaga test young heroines with tasks and traps, and rescue often requires precise attention to objects. In many of these narratives, danger arrives wrapped in a favor. The human skill is to separate gift from hook. The European folktale catalog groups this story with others, where a jealous older woman targets a younger rival, and where 3 attempts lead to a death-like state and revival. The constants are the escalation, the deceptive object, and the return to social life after a public reckoning. Read through a global lens, the tale also invites discussion of beauty standards. The famous opening description has been taken in modern times as a problematic ideal. Yet it is helpful to remember that color triads in older texts can be symbolic rather than literal guidelines for skin tone. White can mean light or purity in seasonal language. Red can mean health. Black can mean the rich soil of winter or the night that frames the stars. Even so, the modern impact is real. Illustrations and screen versions have often narrowed the range of bodies and faces considered fairest. In response, new adaptations have expanded casting and setting to show that the structure of the tale is not tied to a single look. These changes do not break the story. They highlight that the core concern is envy and risk, not one fixed standard of beauty. The tale's justice scene also has cultural echoes. Forcing the villain to dance in burning shoes translates harm into spectacle. It makes private cruelty visible and marks the return to order as a communal act. In modern law and ethics, we might question the excess of such punishment. But as symbol, it says that a society must name and display the line that was crossed. Some modern retellings soften the ending to avoid cruelty. Others keep the hard edge to show that envy carried through ritual and fashion deserves a ritual that undoes it. The choice reflects each era's taste for mercy or severity, and it shows how adaptable the core script is. Another strand of meaning runs through the idea of sleep. The girl does not die, she is paused. Sleep in myth often marks a threshold where time works differently. It allows a community to reflect, to watch, to decide what to do next. The household companions choose to keep vigil rather than to bury or to abandon. In doing so, they model a form of care that is steady and unglamorous. In a world that values action, the tale honors patience and attention. When revival comes, whether by chance or by recognition, it comes to a person who has been held in community rather than discarded. The shift in the revival scene from accident to kiss has had a strong impact on global audiences. The accident version centers attentiveness and luck. The kiss version centers affection and destiny. Each sends a different message about how problems are solved. One says that some dangers are technical and require careful handling. The other says that some dangers respond to recognition and trust. Because later mass media favored the kiss, generations have learned to expect romance as the answer in fairy tales. Critics have pushed back, arguing for versions where the heroine's own choices matter more. Newer adaptations explore those alternatives, letting the girl set terms for trust and take a more active role in her future. The tale's frame can hold those experiments because the core conflict is not about a specific rescuer. It is about surviving envy and re-entering society with wisdom. Beyond the screen and stage, the story has shaped how people talk. Phrases like mirror, mirror, and poisoned apple have entered everyday speech as shorthand for vain comparison and harmful gifts. Commentators describe a public scandal as a poisoned apple when it arrives wrapped in good news, or they speak of a mirror culture when social media turns everyone into both performer and audience. The language sticks because the images are simple and elastic. They carry analysis inside them. If we pull the threads together, the meaning is clear. The tale shows how a person, especially a young woman, moves through a world that measures, flatters, and tests. The symbols teach practical lessons: check offers, keep boundaries, respect work, notice small details, and beware of contests that never end well. The impact has been wide because the story packages those lessons in scenes that are easy to remember and adjust. A lace, a comb, an apple, a coffin of glass. Few words, many uses. The story that looks like a childhood fable turns out to be a map of pressures that still exist, a mirror that repeats public judgment, a gift that hides a hook, a sleep that holds a person between loss and return. These are not old problems only. They are daily ones. That is why the tale continues to travel and to change. Each era edits the rescue, the warning, and the justice scene to match its values, but the core remains. Beneath the song and the color, we keep hearing the same lesson about envy, caution, and community. In the final analysis, Snow White holds an ancient secret in plain sight: how to read the world's beautiful traps and how to step back into life when the test is over.